Okay, we are live again. We are back with Kenny Ballentine part two, and I did it with the Roman numeral twos because you're a movie guy and you would understand why I'd want to do that. That's an 80s
Just
thing.
it looks better. It just looks cooler.
It,
Yeah.
it does. And that's actually something that's really interesting. I noticed that there's not a lot of they don't do a lot of part twos anymore. Do you know why that is? Why they just name the movies different now instead of doing part
I
two and three
actually
like they
was
did in the 80s?
thinking just about that because of Dune. You know,
Yeah.
Dune Part 2 is out right now. Of course, Dune is very much not a sequel. It's
Hmm.
literally like one movie cut in half, you know.
Right.
It's two parts legitimately.
Uh-huh.
Um but I think that just putting 2 and 3 at the end of something was a trend of the '80s, and I don't know who started it, but it just had some umph to it back then that if you said Ghostbusters 2, you got excited 'cause it
Yeah.
just the number was epic.
Yeah.
Uh, but it yeah, now it's cheesy. Now it's cheesy.
Yeah.
I think it
I
became
know.
a
I
too
like it though.
cliche. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen Dune 2 yet?
I'm seeing it on Friday.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Okay.
ashamed I haven't seen it yet because I love Denis Villeneuve.
Mm,
He's like maybe the best director out there right now. I
really?
mean, literally
I don't know
batting a
much.
thousand.
I don't know.
He
Well, did you
he's
did you
so
like the
good,
ori
dude.
did you like the original Dune?
Do you mean the '80s movie?
No, no, no. I mean, sorry, the one that the part one of
Part
this.
1. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I loved it.
Because a lot of my
Um,
friends, I didn't really, I never actually watched it. I meant to and never did.
yeah,
But a lot of people said it was super slow.
yeah, he makes artsy movies.
Yeah.
He's an artsy movie guy who gets big budget projects. So,
Yeah.
like, another example is Blade Runner 2049,
Yeah.
um, which I freaking love, and a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
But it's an awesome movie. He made Arrival, um,
Oh yeah. Right.
Sicario, a really cool
Mhm,
movie called Enemy.
mhm.
Um, but he's an awesome director,
Uh-huh.
and the only complaint I could make about the first Dune is that it's just not done. You know, it literally ends
Yeah.
in the middle. You know, there's not
Uh-huh.
a real arc to it. It's
Hmm.
an end of
Hmm.
part 1. That's it.
Interesting. Well, I'll
Yeah.
tell you, Dune 2 is getting rave reviews from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Everybody I've seen has universally loved it.
Yeah.
Do you like movies like Godzilla? Do you like the monster movies? You seem more
Oh,
of an artsy guy.
yeah, while I wouldn't call them good movies a lot of the
Right.
times, I do just have a soft spot for monsters. I like monsters.
Yeah.
Um, my favorite of, like, modern times is probably Cloverfield. I
Oh, yeah.
really love Cloverfield, just because that felt like both an artistic movie and a monster movie, and did probably the found footage concept better than anyone has since Blair Witch.
Yeah. Oh, Blair Witch was awesome.
Yeah.
I love Blair Witch, man.
Yeah,
You know it's funny. I remember the funny story. I remember seeing the movie Pacific Rim,
mm,
and that movie is just there's like you have to walk in understanding what you're gonna see, right? Like you're not
yeah,
gonna no one's
yeah,
getting an Academy Award for Pacific
that
Rim.
that movie's absurd. That's an absurd movie.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I remember going to church the next Sunday. I think I saw it on Saturday, and I went to church Sunday, and a guy with the word he had heard that I'd seen. He said, he goes, "What did you think?" I was like, "I thought it was great. It was exactly what I was expecting." And he goes, "Yeah, I just didn't, it just didn't seem, he goes, it just didn't seem realistic for me." And I'm like,
It's
I was like, it's monsters versus robots. What did
no,
you expect?
it's literally a grown-up, Power Rangers. That's what it
Right?
was. It reminded
I
me of
would,
the fight at the end of every Power Ranger episode
yeah.
was yeah,
Yeah. It was just funny because I was like, I don't go to these movies for the
yeah.
scientific accuracy.
The sequel to Pacific Rim was one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
I don't think I even saw it.
It's
Yeah.
really bad, and we we reviewed it on the Talkies, my movie podcast, and
Mhm.
it's one of the most hilarious episodes ever. Our episodes when we cover a real stinker tend to
Mm.
be better episodes than when we cover good movies.
So do you when you do the talkies? I've watched a couple of episodes, but honestly, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Do you? I know that the way you handle it is you go to a movie like on a Friday, and then you guys review it after seeing it in the theater, right?
Well, we've done both, and now we kind of mix up stuff that's on streaming services with going to the theaters. That the purity of it changed during the pandemic and all the theaters shut
Sure.
down. So
Right.
we switched to watching whatever movies we could, and now it's just whatever movie we want to watch at the
Mm,
time. We kind of take turns picking, and
mm,
sometimes it's an old movie.
mm.
Uh,
Do you like like I call them the so bad they're good movies?
yeah, yeah. There's a very wide spread of definitions of what makes something so bad it's good.
Yeah.
So, I can't define that as a genre. Um, but I like The Room. I don't know
Oh
if you've
yeah.
seen them from Tommy Wiseau.
Oh yeah.
That's maybe the most iconic so bad it's good movie. There's a
Yeah.
handful of M. Night Shyamalan movies that fit
Oh,
that category.
I can't
Uh,
stand him.
dude,
Any of his movies.
I could watch The Happening, uh, maybe with a couple beers or a little weed, and it's a good time, man. That's a good time.
Uh, I just remember the Village, and just thinking, I was like, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen."
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
He started good. He started good. The
Oh,
Sixth
Sixth
Sense
Sense was fantastic.
and
Fantastic.
Unbreakable is still, I think that's what it's called, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
His second
Hmm.
movie, Unbreakable, is still my favorite comic book movie. That's my
Mm,
yeah, it's
mm,
great.
yeah. Well, I was gonna suggest if you ever get a chance and you just want to watch something so ridiculous on Amazon, Velocipaster, man.
I've
It's
heard about it.
dude, dude, I have been trying.
Yeah.
So I've had Sean Kanan, Eric Bischoff, I've had Tom Arnold on. I've had like
Yeah.
a bunch of cool people. I have hit up the director for Velocipaster probably a dozen times and I cannot get a response. And I'm just like, I was like, dude, I had like some serious names on and I can't get Brendan Steer to come on to
'Cause
uh
he's too
it's
big
just
for you, man. You're you're small potatoes compared to Velocipaster.
yeah, well, he's doing a part two, which is why I want him
That's
on
cool.
because I want to ask him about it. But yeah, man. So well, anyway, well, I wanted to continue some of our discussion from last time, and there were a few questions I had specifically. When we ended up last time, we were talking, about your kind of just, I guess we'd say your gender identity and how you
Mhm.
identify and how that kind of came about.
Yeah.
And there were a few, going back to the non-binary thing, we had a discussion of kind of how you define it, understanding
Mhm.
it's kind of hard to define. And one of the things that you said was that you always had kind of been uncomfortable with kind of people calling you a man.
Mhm.
And and I'm just curious what what that is about. Do you think that that is because of the labels of what kind of society puts on a man that makes it so uncomforting for you?
I think that's definitely plays a role.
Mhm.
Um, it in terms of all the whys, I am the ways that I am. I don't have answers.
No,
Just
I
that I
don't think
am.
that's I don't think that's where what I'm getting at. I
Mm,
understand that you are the way that you are, and I think that that's the idea, the spectrum idea makes sense to me. But I'm curious about, like, for example, I think what I'm really curious about is why do we need to have a non-binary status? Why can't what is it about being a man with feminine qualities that
mm.
that isn't enough or satisfying to somebody who's non-binary.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Sure. I suppose. Um, I mean, the most basic way to put it is it just feels wrong.
Mm,
Kind of like if I welcomed you into my business and said, Good day, madam," to
mhm.
you,
Right,
you know,
right.
it's like, yeah, you could get into like the real specifics as to why madam doesn't work for you or miss,
Mhm, mhm.
but way down at your core, it's because no, that's not me, right?
Yeah, but the thing is like, and I don't know because I'm not in your body or in your mind frame or in your gender, and I don't pretend to know
Hmm.
what it's like to be transgender. I think you actually articulated it very well in the last episode uh, to describe it for people, and I think that's why I have found you, Kenny, to be quite articulate. I can tell that you've spent a lot of time thinking deeply about these things, which is why I feel comfortable asking you about them.
Yeah,
But like for me personally, if I walked into a room and somebody called me madam, I'd be like, well, that's a little strange, but
yeah.
whatever. If that's what they want to do, I guess. You know what I mean? Like it
Right,
wouldn't
right.
bother me so
Yeah,
much. You
yeah,
see what I'm
sure.
saying?
All right.
So I'm just curious what the bother is, I suppose. And I
Sure.
think the other, yeah, go ahead. Let's go there, and
I'll
we'll
give
talk.
some. I'll give a little bit, but just know that this isn't complete. You know,
Sure.
I don't want to boil this down to something really simplistic because it isn't. But in terms of culture and gender, there are aspects of being a man that I don't like. Right.
Yeah.
I don't like that when I'm walking down a sidewalk, and once I say this to you and put it in your mind, you're going to notice it and you're going to see it all the time. If you're
Yeah.
walking down the sidewalk and a woman is walking towards you, long before you move, she will move. She will get out of the way. She will step down off the sidewalk and let you pass. If
Interesting.
you're walking in a store and you are in a collision course, you won't move. The
Hmm.
woman will.
Hmm.
Always. It's just how we've been programmed in our heads, right?
Can I say something
Men
about that real
Yeah.
quick? I've actually found myself, and I think this is just the status of being so big and
Well, yeah,
recognizing that I'm
yeah.
like that I tend to move out of the way because I know that I take up a lot of space. I tend
Sure.
to acquiesce quite a bit in those aspects. Now, not on like a basketball court, right? But I mean,
Sure.
like, but if I'm
Yeah.
walking down an aisle, so it's a little different for me, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
take up half the aisle, so you gotta
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
respectful.
I feel the need out of respect to move because I'm so
Yeah,
gigantic. You know what I mean?
right.
Yeah.
But just taking that concept and spreading it out beyond just the way we walk, uh,
Sure.
uh, there's kind of a culturally imposed superiority for men, I believe, in
Yeah.
general. And I don't like seeing it, and I don't like propagating it, and I don't like being given any kind of privilege because of the genitals I was born with.
Mhm, mhm. It's interesting too that I think that that is also a good unintended consequence of all this gender stuff is having these conversations. Like
Yeah,
I've spoken to a number of women about these things often, and there are just some things that like I don't even think about. Like for example, me walking around downtown by myself. I mean, I go to Kings games all the time. There are homeless people everywhere. There are people who are mentally disturbed everywhere, right? I never am worried about my physical well-being. You know what I mean? Like
sure,
I've never been walking down a dark alley and been afraid that somebody's going to attack me, right?
sure.
Now I'm 6'7", 295. Like no one's going to try to. I'm the least likely to be attacked, right? But a girl in a dress in that same situation, like so different experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's just like a literal reality. Then you add on top of that the way parts of society respond to that information is really different. So, for example, um, if I were attacked, right? Um, and yeah, let's say I was attacked in a dark alley at night, or what? Maybe not even just attacked, and my time comes to be in front of a judge or a police officer or something. There is 0% chance that that judge or police officer is going to ask me, well, what were you wearing?
Mm, mhm, mhm,
And women get asked that kind of thing all the time. Like
mhm.
the way they presented themselves is part of the reason they were attacked.
So, lawyer talk, let me ask you, do you think that the reason a judge or a police officer might ask that is to be prepared because the perpetrator may say, well, she was wearing this and she said this, and they're just preparing for that? Or do you think that they're judging when they do that?
Oh, I think based on all the other places we hear those same words,
Yeah,
that it's more of a cultural judgment type
judgment.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting, especially with all this. You're a wrestling fan, all this Vince McMahon stuff that's come out. I was really surprised when now maybe this is just my experience in the wrestling business, knowing people who know him, being involved with people who know him, actually being backstage at a Royal Rumble, like doing those things. I was shocked at how many fans were like, when they heard, because there was a list of like all the gifts that he gave her when all that stuff was
I
going
don't
on.
know this story.
You don't know anything about this?
No, I'm pretty
Oh,
unplugged
dude, you
from
gotta you
wrestling.
gotta Google Vince McMahon, man, for the last couple of months. So it came out that he apparently had this girl that he met in her 20s, I think, that lived in his building, who needed a job, and it became like she just basically became he's getting busted for human trafficking. Like he it turned into, she was kind of like, he sexually assaulted her. It became a relationship, like a quid pro quo type thing, but he started passing her around, and like Brock Lesnar was involved, like
Dude, God,
uh
ew.
Brock Lesnar, dude, seriously, the new video game, Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon are completely scrubbed from it. Vince
Wow.
McMahon is nowhere along. UFC, well, not UFC, but the parent company of UFC bought the
Yeah,
WWE.
I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, TKO, Vince McMahon was the executive chairman of the board. He had to resign. He just sold 25% of his stock. Like, he's being investigated by the FBI. I
Huh.
mean, like, so it was bad news, and nobody knows how deep it goes. But I was surprised at fans when there was a list of like the gifts that he gave her over the course of the 3 or 4 years that she was involved in this. And people were like, "Oh man, do me next." Like, "Oh yeah, she was taking all the benefits." But I mean, like, literally, it
Uh,
was gross. It was gross,
yeah.
man. Like, there was a thing where he was in a threesome with her and like took a crap on her, and like just all sorts of, I mean, it was like disgusting, depraved, crazy
Jeez.
stuff that you're like, "Oh gosh, this is like
Yeah.
Harvey Weinstein level stuff." And
Yeah.
so
I am not that surprised, actually.
I'm not
S
either. That's the thing,
Yeah.
is it's like when I heard it, I was like, I mean, that doesn't necessarily not track with what I know
Yeah, I mean,
about.
I've heard a lot of people say he's a nice guy, but he has that, like, aura that I'm like, "I don't wanna be in a room with you, dude. I
Yeah,
don't want you
well,
in a room with my kids."
yeah, and they put in the complaint. You can look at the complaint. I read it, and I did a podcast on it.
Wow.
But like, but they put screenshots of some of the text messages he sent her, talking about how he was passing her pictures around and telling all these guys she'd bang all of them at the same time, and like all this stuff. And you're just looking at that and you're like, this is a next level. This isn't just like, hey, because this is going to sound terrible, but I'm like, oh, you mean 78-year-old Vince McMahon, who has $1 billion, was like banging a 25-year-old in his office? Like, that doesn't shock. Does that shock anybody? You know what I
No.
mean?
Well, that much is almost expected.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's terrible to say, but like a guy like that, uh, who's been roided out for about 40 years, like, you're
Yeah,
shocked that he's,
yeah.
and but at the same time, like the depths of the depravity was rather shocking. And to see that and then hear people victim blame was so alarming to me. You know what I mean?
Don't have heroes, man. That's what life has taught me. Just don't have heroes,
Yeah. It was hard for me,
or
quite frankly.
have fictional heroes.
Yeah.
You know.
It was honestly, it was hard for me because, like, I think we've talked about how, I did wrestling. I'm doing it again. I'm wrestling right now, a little bit here and there. But like, I always kind of wondered, like, what if I had pushed that far? And that was the first time where I was like, I am so glad I did not get, because I mean, who knows where that goes, right? I mean, who knows who is involved and how many people knew, and to be put in the position to know that someone like that is doing crazy stuff like that and feeling like you can't say anything because he is basically the god of pro wrestling. Like, you piss off Vince McMahon, you're not getting a full-time job anywhere, you know
Yeah.
uh, so it's pretty shocking. But back to, so anyway, that was a little bit of a side. But you know I guess, like I said, I mean, do you think that maybe if society would change the way that we view gender in general, do you think that there would no longer be a need for non-binary, or would you just say, well, no, then everyone would be non-binary?
Yeah, I mean, I think utopian thinking is pretty useless, but if in that kind of space, I think we'd ideally move to a sort of a genderless society.
Yeah.
And uh that doesn't take anything away from the sexes, right?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
are still required for procreation. But if all of the baggage that went with your sex, was stripped away, and you could just be exactly who you're meant to be without any kind of expectation put upon you based on what you were born with, I'd only see that as a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because the reason I bring this up is because it seems like, you know, part of this movement is challenging traditional gender roles. And I'm curious what the what is the end goal? Like, what is the hope that it changes, that everybody can just find their own identity within gender, or to completely eliminate gender? What is
Well,
the what's the
well, first of all, there's no organized movement with an agenda that could really answer that question.
Right, that's why I'm
But
asking, though, is that
but,
it's
I mean, it's definitely a personal thing, and some people just want to feel safe and free to express themselves the way they feel, and that's the end of it. And then some people, I'd imagine, would wanna see a much larger system-wide shift of paradigm around gender, sure.
Mhm, mhm. So one of the
But
things
but
that
but the
came
whole idea, just finishing that, of, what I would like to see is the idea of a gender role disappearing,
mm,
right?
mhm,
Like, why should there be any specific role that's connected to so it's not about gender roles changing, it's why have gender roles at all? That shouldn't be a thing,
right, right.
you know?
That's interesting. The other question I have, I don't remember if you were still coming to church or not, but I remember in our ward there was a discussion about, the way that, gender and sexuality is now being taught in public school.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, like, I was concerned about, uh, how young some of this was being taught and what was being taught in the younger ages. Uh, um, and I was just curious. I don't know how much research you did at the time, or if you were concerned at all. But do you have any? Did you have any thoughts as that was going on? It seems like it's kind of died down, but at the time
Yeah.
it was pretty hot button.
Yeah, I wasn't in church at the time, but I did dive into that because I wanted to be able to speak to it when people got, you know, upset around me.
Sure.
Um, First of all, a lot about what was being taught was exaggerated, in terms of at the different grade levels, but boiling it down to just, uh, separating the idea of your sex and your gender, and that gender being something that a kid could tell you what their gender is. I can't tell you what your gender is. I think that's a fine thing. That's nothing wrong with that.
Well, yeah, and I think my concern was, because I looked at some of the books, and I was concerned that it was, I can't remember what grade it was. It seemed to be maybe third grade-ish, that they were like discussing how, and I would say also, it's not so much even the fact that they're talking about, you know, same gender, sex or transgender sex. It's just sex in general at third grade. I just seem like, knowing my son who's in fifth grade and is still uncomfortable with the subject,
Yeah.
having those conversations seemed a little young to me. And the way I described it when people were saying, because the argument that I always heard was that, well, we're trying to eliminate the bullying aspect for kids who are different and or who have family structures that look different. And I always just said, listen, I don't care if in kindergarten you're telling them, hey, like, Billy's got two dads and you have a dad and a mom, and
Sure.
his two dads love him just as much as your dad and mom love you, and that you should respect that. Like, I am all on board with that. I'll go pick it with you to make sure that that happens. But when in these younger ages, they're showing how, sex in general, let alone, any sort of sex between two men or two women are happening. That is when my light bulb goes up and goes, we need to have a conversation about
Yeah.
that. And the thing that concerned me too was that it found in certain circles, when I wanted to have that conversation, I was quickly, and maybe it was because I was an active member of the church, but I was quickly labeled as kind of a bigot for even wanting to have the conversation. I
Sure.
go,
And that's not
well,
fair.
listen, right. So I don't know. I'm just curious, being on your, where you're at in this.
Yeah.
How
So
did you feel about some of
I'm
that?
not I'm probably not qualified to talk to this too much because we homeschool our kids.
Right.
Um, that being said, we choose how sex education happens, but we definitely do it a lot differently than they do in schools
Right.
or not in school. We in our house, we're really open about sex and all things related to it, just
Mm,
in general.
yeah.
My son Forrest understood that his mom and sisters have a menstrual cycle and this thing called a period that occasionally affects how they act and feel during the day. He knew what that was when he was like 5, you know.
Right.
And my daughter was comfortable saying, "Not today, I'm on my period, I don't feel good," to her 5-year-old brother.
Mhm.
Not a problem. Nothing like that would have happened in my house as a kid,
Right.
you know?
Right.
I
Yeah.
remember seeing, tampons in my sister's, purse when I was a
Mhm.
kid and asking, "Hey, what are those?" And she was like, "Get away from me," you know, like that. She's like, "Shut up. Never talked about this again." I'm like, "Okay, remains a mystery." Um, but, we used to have, chickens in our backyard.
Mhm.
Um, they're lovely pets. We are vegan, we don't eat eggs, so we would we would give the eggs to other people, but we just liked having chickens. And, uh, we had a gay chicken who would
Mm.
we had a hen that would mount this other hen, all right? This would happen. And we'd get the quote, "What is this? What is happening?" Well, I'm like, "It looks like that chicken is trying to mate with another chick," which doesn't make a lot of sense, but this happens in wildlife. And so or if we were at anywhere in nature and saw like the dragonflies flying around hooked up to each other, like, "Oh, look at it, we
Mhm.
got a double dragonfly. It's because they're mating. Let's talk about mating." So
Mm.
words like penis and sperm and vagina and ovum are normal words in our house.
Hmm.
And I don't like uh, hiding the truth from kids, especially when it's like the most basic fundamental truth to existence, you know?
Right, right,
So
right. Well, I agree with you on that. I've had many of friends whose parents were rather conservative in the sex talk. And my parents were definitely not. My dad loved making us uncomfortable by saying, things about, wanting to have sex with mom. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. That was like, ah, gosh, he just thought that was hilarious.
yeah,
But it was funny because then, as I got older, I didn't have some of the shame components that you tend to see, especially within, I think with women within the church. I didn't have any of those shame components because it was just freely talked about. I think that's an important aspect, I think at the right time, and I think that's what's so hard.
sure.
I think that's also part of why I think maybe me as someone who's generally conservative, though I don't know if I'd call myself Republican anymore, is that I tend to think. I'm not super comfortable with the government dictating how my kids are taught in social things.
Sure. Here's the counter argument, and it's not. I'm not even really making an argument. I think parents should have complete uh, the ability to decide how their kid learns what and when. I think parents should have that input. I think if this sort of education is going on, there should be the notice that goes home. Hey, we're doing this week. If you want to opt out, sign this paper, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But what does need to happen, and again, I'm not on top of what actually is happening in the schools, and maybe it is too much and maybe it is too little. I don't know. But what I would hope happens is that if there is a kid, maybe even a third grader or younger, who needs questions answered and doesn't come from a home where they're going to get that.
Mm,
You know, a lot of kids are in homes where it's not safe to talk about things like this,
right.
or don't have parents,
Yeah. Yeah.
to have a library where they could go and find books on that topic. Well, that's what humans are supposed to do when they have questions, is go
Yeah.
get them answered. Having a source where you could get that information can save lives sometimes. And getting the wrong information from the wrong people can really put a kid into some serious danger. So
Mm,
something has to be there,
yeah.
even for
You
young
know,
kids.
going back to this gender issue, one thing that I've noticed seems to seems to be the case is that these gender issues tend to be largely Western culture based. Like you don't hear a lot about this stuff in say Eastern cultures necessarily as much, or like the Middle East or Africa. Um, I'm curious why that is. Do we just have a lot of time on our hands to think about this stuff, or
No, there's a few parts to that. First of all, if you look into deep culture, history, and antiquity, you see gender manifesting in all kinds of ways in virtually every culture. This is not a new thing. It's been around a really long time. Many cultures actually revered people who uh, were some kind of genderqueer. There were Native American tribes to where when someone came about who uh, expressed as a woman who was born as a man, they they would see them as someone who was either two spirited, like had two spirits in them, or had been touched by divinity, some kind of goddess influence, sort of thing like that. So it wasn't always a taboo thing in a lot of cultures. In some cultures, it was actually revered, and you see it in the artwork, and you see it in their history, you see it in their mythology a lot. Um, but in a lot of those places today, like if you think about like in India, many African countries, sexual taboo is intense, extreme.
Mm.
It is a very, very, you have very, very repressed and even dangerous um, situations with regards to sexuality. India is like the rape capital of the world.
Yeah,
It's
it's
insane,
shocking. Yeah.
and you have women who who once experienced these kinds of things, instead of being helped, become shunned because they're like dirty or damaged now, and um, so a place like that is you're not very likely to ever share, open up, express what you're feeling.
I wonder
Um,
why that is. What is it about India? Just is it just the laws or just the way the certain culture is or
yeah, I'm not culturally literate enough on India to say, but it's the same thing in places like Pakistan.
yeah.
From what I understand, sort of in the underground where you could find uh, sex clubs and strip clubs and that kind of thing. It is way more extreme than the things you typically see in the United States. And that's a response to the amount of repression. I mean, you're talking
Mm,
about people going around in their daily lives. The only thing they see is a woman's eyes,
yeah.
right? They have a culture where it's literally cover everything.
Yeah.
Uh, the response to that, it tends to be going just as far extreme in the other direction. Um,
Yeah. You know,
yeah.
as a member of the church, and I don't know how well, like how strong you are in the ex-Mormon community per se, but like that's something that I've noticed is tends to be, and we talked a little bit about it in the last podcast. It tends to be something that happens where some of these things that even by society standards is a little fringe. There's a strong ex-Mormon community within. And do you think that that is also a response to some of the like kind of the repression per se, as you talked about within the church, particularly in like sexual stuff?
Uh, likely. I mean, I don't think it's whatever the response is. I don't think it's healthy if
Right, right.
if you're uh trying to insist that we're not sexual animals. You know,
Mhm.
ultimately humans are sex crazed, violent monkeys who are figuring out how to coexist with each other, right? And Mormonism claims that the natural man is the enemy to God, right? And if that's your belief, that's fine. I don't think uh, I don't think it's healthy to make your purpose in life to deny nature.
Mm.
You know, because we
Yeah,
simultaneously say we're made in God's image. You know.
right, right. It's an interesting dichotomy, and if you think about it from a philosophical perspective, right? I mean, the thing that separates us from just a sex crazed monkey is a prefrontal cortex and the ability to logic your way through these things and trying to figure out a way to do things in a less violent way, right? And
Hmm.
to reason together. And there's lots of different philosophies. And I think what's interesting is, wouldn't you agree that in most kind of philosophies that there is some element of putting off the natural man?
I would not say in most philosophies. I'd
Mm.
say in most religions,
Yeah,
I'd say
yeah.
that's the case. But there's different ways of looking at that. You know, uh, the Buddha. One of the things that he was pushing against was uh, what was the spiritual practice of the time was in extremes, right? It was
Mm,
like not eating for 30 days and experiencing pain and things like that. And then on the other side, you had the heathens who would just indulge in uh sex and food and the pleasures of life, right?
Mhm.
And so his philosophy was the middle way, right?
Mhm.
Um and when it came to like controlling our natural whatever you call our natural impulses, it was always from this paradigm of uh limiting suffering, right?
Mm.
The things that cause you suffering are your wants for control and desire and things like that. And that's a little different. That's a different way of looking at it than I think we do in Christianity and in Mormonism.
Mhm.
Um, really, the things we do and don't do in Mormonism is because obedience is the way you express your your love to Heavenly Father. You know,
Mhm.
obedience is the first law of heaven and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. You're obeying a rule that there's a heavenly dictator that said
Mhm.
these are the rules you have to follow to come back into my house, and so you're going to follow them. And I think that's a whole different ball game than I'm going to do these things to eliminate suffering in myself.
Mm. Interesting. Do you think that there's a level in some of these rules? I mean, this is certainly something that a lot of members of the church say is that a lot of these rules do alleviate some form of suffering.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot of that, but uh I think you'd agree that it all boils down to obedience in the end, because when any of those rules don't make sense to us,
Mhm.
where do we end up with? Oh, we do it because we're supposed to,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think if any member of the church is being honest with themselves, they've had an opportunity where they've been like, I don't know if that, I don't know how I feel about that. And you pray, you reason, you do those things, you decide whether you're going to follow or not. I do appreciate that by the church, that the church kind of encourages that, but then also at the same time, there's kind of a cultural, and it probably comes from the top idea that, well, you know, I think what I push back on a lot. In fact, I mentioned I went to a faith journey fireside this last Sunday, and there was something that was super helpful in that actually came from a Christian minister more than even anyone who's a member. But I think that there's this thing in the church where there's this idea that the more closely you follow to these rules, the better you are.
Mhm.
And I fight against that greatly. You know what I mean? I just don't think that that's true. I don't think that, I don't think God loves you more when you're better.
Mhm.
I think God loves you, period.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do to make him love you more or less. And uh, so I think that idea that I recently came to this idea myself, where I think I have been the type of person who has believed that if things are going well in my life, it is because I must be doing things right. And
Yeah.
then if things are going wrong, I must be doing something wrong.
It's a
And
prosperity
so
gospel.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think I've come to realize, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, that I don't think there's always necessarily a link
Yeah.
to those two things.
And I think it's really dangerous to believe there is.
Right.
It's gonna lead you to some really unhappy places.
Yeah.
But that idea, that prosperity gospel, whether it's doctrinal or not, I think I think you'd have some people who would argue about that.
Mhm.
Um, uh, it certainly does permeate a lot of Mormon culture, I think.
Mm. Yeah.
Uh, one thing I always felt when going to church was that even if I don't have my shit together, I need to really look like I do. Right?
Mhm.
The last thing you want is to be in sacrament meeting and for people to tell that you're stressed out and broke and your car's going to be taken away, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't want to let that on to people because,
Right.
there's kind of a social pressure to look really happy and
Sure.
successful.
Yeah.
And I think it comes from that very concept, that idea, it's said in the Book of Mormon a couple times that the righteous will prosper in the land,
Mhm.
and I think that idea gets taken to its extreme.
Mhm.
Um, I had a time where I relied on some church welfare,
Mhm.
uh, where we were getting some food from the bishop's storehouse, and even a time when the ward covered rent uh, for a brief period. And there was a Sunday each month where checks would be written for the people who needed church welfare help. And I was always so grateful that that happened. And it was one thing that I always held on to, even when I was struggling with my faith, was that it's really cool that the church does this.
Mhm.
That's awesome. But I got to tell you, when I had to walk into the building to go pick up that check and walk past, bishopric members and my elders quorum president, and they know why I'm there because that's why all those people are there at that time. It was the worst feeling ever.
Yeah.
Just the worst feeling.
Yeah.
Hated that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is unfortunate that that does happen, and it's there's a lot of that, and I think it even expands past that. This whole concept you're talking about looking happy. I think that I don't know where that culture comes from, but it's certainly there. It's almost like church is just an extension of social media. You go in there and it's just like everyone's, you look at those. That's why I've said it a hundred times. I think at this point, where I'll be in an elders quorum meeting or whatever, and they'll be talking about all these things, and everyone will be talking about how wonderful this happened or that happened, and I've kind of said a couple of times, you might have been in there one time where I said, listen, I've been in a bishopric and I've been an elders quorum president, I've been on a high council, and I can tell you, based on my experience, that everybody in this room is secretly a train wreck.
Yeah.
And
But so why are we being secret about it?
right. Well, and that's the thing that I think is so hard. You actually, I remember we had a conversation long time ago where we were just shooting the breeze and kind of got into these deep topics. And you said you didn't think that the church did a very good job of making sure everybody understands that everybody's a sinner and or something to that
Mhm,
effect.
mhm.
And I really I agreed with that quite a bit because you're right. Like you look at these people and they're driving the nice car and they look like they have the happy kids. And look, I've been that guy, right? I've been that guy. And if you look at my social media, I'm still that guy. You know what I mean? I've been very well financially successful. That does not mean my life is anywhere near perfect.
Oh, I know
And
about your life.
yeah. Right. So it's kind of like one of these things where it's real. I don't think people understand how hard it is to have a family, or to know that your life doesn't look like what you think everyone else's life looks like.
Yeah,
That makes
and yeah, so it's that lack of vulnerability that always
Mhm.
bothered me in church, especially in places like elders quorum.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and I know there's some vulnerability occasionally happens in like testimony meeting. The sisters in their relief society will cry together because it. You think it's hard being a Mormon man. I think it's way harder being a Mormon mom. Uh,
Yeah.
but uh, but yeah, we never would talk about it. We would
Yeah.
try we would there was this pressure to just look the part all the time. I don't remember his name anymore. His first name was Jacob, but he was in our ward, and I loved this guy because one, he never dressed like normal Mormons. He'd wear like a plaid shirt and like a flat cap, and he always had facial hair.
Jacob Ria.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's right.
yeah,
Something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
mhm,
He had a couple him and his wife had a couple daughters.
yeah.
And I remember this one time he sat in front of me and I could tell he was stressed out, just tired and stressed out. And he sits down, he reaches into his bag. We're in sacrament meeting. He reaches into his bag and cracks open a Diet Coke. And he starts drinking his, and I'm like, "Oh, I love you so much." And
Uh,
then one of his kids accidentally kicks his Coke over and it spills a little, and he's like, "Oh, dang it," and I'm just like, "I love this
and
man. I love this
yeah,
man. Thank you
yeah,
for
man.
showing yourself to us."
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's the thing. I wish we had more of that. I think there would be a lot of fulfillment in that. I get really. I've actually done it a couple of times in different meetings where like we have these lessons, and the lessons like you can predict the answers that are going to come.
God.
And
Those
elders quorum present.
manuals drive me crazy, man.
Well, even when they're not using the manuals, though, you know what I mean. Like even when like they've kind of shifted in elders quorum. They've shifted away from elders quorum manuals, and it's just we go over conference talks, and so it gives quite a liberal, you got a wide range of where someone could go with some of these conference talks and the questions that can be asked. And but the thing is based on the question, I think that the same people talk, and they say the same things, and it kind of, I don't know how many times I've heard when they're like, "Oh, so how do you lead your family spiritually?" "Oh, my wife," like these guys have no spirituality in their
Yeah.
being. You know what I mean? And I'm just, you know, I wish, quite frankly, if I'm being 100%, I wish there was more honest talk about some of the things that people are struggling with.
Honestly, I think it comes top down. I think it has to do with the fact that from the top you have this thing, you got this general conference thing, right? Where all these men look exactly the same. Um, they all dress the same and they all give extremely rehearsed and well written speeches um, that never show like vulnerability.
Yeah.
You don't get, I mean, occasionally you get like a GA will shed some tears while he's testifying at the end of a talk or something like that. But mostly, if you switched out the subject matter, this looks like a board meeting for like a corporation. You know what I mean? And so it's not demonstrated to the people to to really share what's going on inside you and at a deep level.
That's funny when you brought that up, though. You're right, but there have been a couple. Like for example, I remember Jeffrey Holland doing a talk where he basically kind of admitted that he had dealt with depression,
Yeah,
and I remember thinking like that was so nice to hear. You know,
sure. Yeah. But the point that the very idea that you're saying, yeah, there's a couple there, no, there were a few, is illustrating the point, I think.
right,
That it's just
right,
not, it's not it's not typical, it's not the way Mormons do things. You know what I mean?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. You're gonna get me off on a rant. I was just talking with another friend about this. Like, I can predict the first 5 minutes of any talk.
Mm,
You know what I mean? The first 5 minutes
hmm.
is going to be sharing the story about getting the call from the bishopric on, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Hey, I got the phone and I knew I shouldn't answer, and I answered, and it's brother so and so, and I knew I was caught, and then so if this number comes through, no, and I was so nervous. Hopefully, my thoughts, or like the new couple comes in. Let me tell you the story about how we met in 2002. You know what I mean? Let me go through our entire life story,
Yeah.
and I just, there's not a lot of meat to a lot of those things, and
They're all about routine. Uh or my cousin did something that really shook up his ward, and it's so menial and little and stupid that it's crazy that it shook up his ward. And that's when him and his wife were asked to give their talk, he insisted that his wife go second, that he be the first talk, and that she back cleanup, so to speak, you know.
Uh,
And it's never done that way. It's supposed to be the
right,
wife gives the lighter, smaller, cute talk where she talks about their family and how they met and things like that. And then the husband gets up and drops some doctrine or something, and
right.
is the anchor for closing out sacrament meeting. And
Yeah.
so he had swapped it around, and it caused a ruckus.
Yeah. It's so funny. You mentioned the routines. I went to a training or whatever when I was an elders quorum president, specific for bishops and elders quorum presidents, and Elder Bednar was there.
Hmm.
And Elder Bednar's a question came to him. They did a little Q&A, and they asked him what keeps him up at night. And I found this really interesting. He said, "I am afraid that the traditions of the Western Church is going to choke out the growth in Africa." And
Hmm.
he said, if there's anything that's going to kill the church, it's the traditions of the church that's going to do it. And I thought that's really interesting, because I remember in my ward before I came to the ward I'm in now, it's a side stake. My dad was in that ward, and we were both. He was like the high priest group leader or whatever. I was the elders quorum president, and he was tasked with planning the Christmas party. And they'd done this Christmas party with this big dinner every single year. The problem is that it's really hard on the few who put that dinner together to put it together.
Yeah.
So he just decided, he's like, look, let's not do a giant dinner. Let's just do like a light thing so everybody can enjoy and all that. You would have thought that he had basically shot someone's baby,
Yeah.
and like there was a revolt. Half the people didn't show up. I mean, over that, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it's really interesting how, we've talked about some of these things that in your view you think need to change. And I don't necessarily disagree with you on some of those things. Uh, you can see how those changes are when, because I think it's hard. I think you're not being realistic if you don't think that some of these, even if you are a true believer, don't think that the members of the Quorum of the 12 think about losses in membership, right?
Yeah.
And so, you can see why some of the, even if you do have impressions that some of these things need to move, that you are accounting for the fact that a large, like, you, women getting the priesthood would be a huge change. I mean, think about how many members of the church left because we went to 2-hour church. There were people who did,
Sure. Sure.
or the
Yeah.
COVID vaccine recommendation, who
Yeah.
left because of that.
Yep.
So it's hard. But let me shift gears with you real quick and ask you a question.
Yep.
We've talked. It sounds to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you've done a lot of work with regard to your mental health over the years.
Yep.
I think if
Still
I,
working on it.
yeah, well, we all are, and
Mhm.
but the thing that I find so interesting, I bet that if I really wanted to, if I focused just on the people who contact me about wanting to come on this podcast, I could fill the next year of podcasts with therapists and life coaches.
Mm.
Like,
Mhm.
there are so many.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder, and this may be just my own experience in dealing with people close to me who've gone through therapy, right? If there's a law of diminishing returns after a while. Like, what do you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
With therapy itself?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
at some point, uh I don't know. I mean, I understand the concept of, well, if you understand why certain things happen, right?
Mhm.
Why you react in certain ways, that you can then work on eliminating that and maybe change your behaviors, right?
Yeah.
I get that. But sometimes, and again, I'm just talking my own experience, it seems as though people will often, when they go through therapy, find the reason and then suddenly that becomes an excuse for the bad behavior.
Mm,
Or if you're going for so long and things aren't changing,
sure.
or if you're focusing on it so much, all of these issues so much constantly, almost doing more harm than good. Do you see what I'm saying? What do you, I mean, does that make any sense? And what do you think about
Sure.
that?
Sure, it could. It could. And there's about as many flavors of therapist out there as there is anything else.
Mhm.
And there are definitely bad therapists, and there are
Yes, there
even
are.
abusive therapists.
Yes, there
Um,
are.
so that's a fact. And then don't even get me started on coaches, because first of all, you don't even need anything to be called a coach. You could,
Your brother, your brother
I
came
know,
on, and I asked him, I go, so
yeah,
you're a so and so coach. What does that mean? And he was the first one I've had. He's like, not a whole lot, you know.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I always wave a tentative red flag with if you're trying to fix your mental health with a coach,
Right,
just
right.
because you've got to look a lot deeper, because that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But I think if therapy is working right, um, it should either be working towards a goal of some kind or treating your active bleeding. All right.
Mm,
So if you got open wounds that are still bleeding that need to be taken care of, that could be like an ongoing situation. It might take a long time. It might be
sure,
indefinite, you know,
sure.
um, or you're trying to get over something and you make a plan that makes progress and you graduate more or less, you know.
Right.
Right now, um, uh, what I started with in my therapy was treating very specific PTSD symptoms.
Mm,
Um, and we did that using EMDR uh,
mm,
and and talk therapy.
mm,
And we got to a point where those symptoms are really minimized. They're not necessarily completely gone, but when I started therapy, it was every day. You know, it was all the
mm,
time. And now it's something that might come up once or twice a month. You know.
mm. Can you let me stop you right there and ask you a
Mhm.
question? Can you describe for people who maybe don't know what EMDR is?
Yeah, I'll try. It's yeah, it's a little complicated and seems a little weird at first. But basically, you're doing some eye movement exercises while revisiting the traumatic events in your mind. The simulating rapid eye movement, the kind of activity that happens when you sleep, does something to your brain to help you process your trauma. So the reason you have PTSD is your brain has never put that trauma away, basically. It's still
Mm,
living in the forefront of your brain as if it happened today, as if it's still happening to you. And so your body and your mind is still acting like you're in danger. You're still on edge all the time. You still have a fight or flight
mm,
response happening, even though the event might have happened years and years ago.
mm,
And so the EMDR is a method for sort of guiding your brain to putting that experience where it's supposed to be in your brain files, basically.
mm,
You
mhm,
know,
mhm,
get it out
mhm.
of today and put it in the past.
Yeah.
So
So, and have you found that to be more helpful for those symptoms than just talk therapy?
for those symptoms, yes, yeah.
Mm,
And
mhm.
it's specific to PTSD. That's what it's
Yeah.
for.
Mhm.
And there are practitioners who use it for other things. My therapist says that's ill-advised,
Right.
and again, there are good practitioners and bad ones, and I've spoken to
Mhm.
people who've had terrible experiences with EMDR. You have to be very, very gentle with yourself. It's not easy because you really get into that traumatic event, you go there again, you
Mm,
know,
mm,
you try to
mhm.
recreate it, talking it out and visualizing it, sometimes even moving your body in positions that matched positions you were in at the time and things like that, while doing this eye movement exercise. With the one I do, you follow a light. You have this light bar, and the light goes back and forth, and you follow it with your eyes. And it was really helpful.
Mm,
You start in the first round, you go through it, and you rate your amount of difficulty of dealing with that memory on a 1 to 10 scale, and it usually starts off at a high 9 or 10. And once you go through the memory um, few rounds, you end up down at like a 3 or a 2.
mm.
And all of a sudden you're like, well, I can talk about this now, and I'm not shaking, and I'm not
Yeah,
freaking out, you know?
yeah, that's helpful. So now, uh, with therapy, then you found it to be helpful. But are there times that you've taken breaks in therapy, or did you take you a while to find the right therapist?
Yeah, yeah. The first therapist I went through was through my Kaiser health insurance. I
Not
am of the
advised.
I'm of the opinion that Kaiser does not Kaiser hates mental health. I think they really do. It's really, really understaffed. And so,
Yeah.
first of all, they're really slow to get people in. If you have Kaiser and you need help and are listening to this podcast, the best thing you can do is tell them you're suicidal, even if you're
Jeez.
not. Even if you're not, I'm serious, because that's the only way you'll get the attention you need, basically.
I'll tell you a story about Kaiser Mental Health. When I got in my car accident back in 2018, uh, they I dealt with a brain injury, and in the first
Hmm.
couple months, I had Kaiser for like the first 4 months. It took me a while to recover, but they wanted to give me some antidepressants, and I was like, I really don't want to do that. But they're like, oh no, no, you should, and you got to meet this psychiatrist. And I went in and I went to the psychiatrist and I told him, I go, I don't want the meds. Like all I want is some coping mechanisms to just deal with the symptoms until they heal, because I'm pretty sure they're going to heal, right? And he was like, "Oh no, no." And then he started going through like my medical history, almost trying to suggest that I had like had previous anxiety or something before the car accident. And
Mm.
he pointed to this thing where he was like, well, you came in with heart palpitations in 2016. I go, no, yeah, I had like as my heart started racing and I had some pain in my jaw, and I called the advice nurse to see like what I should do, and she told me to get to the ER immediately, like I was having a heart attack. It actually was fine. I was just she freaked me out, and I was like, well, I better go if she thinks I should, and it turned out to be nothing. You know what I mean? And it just seemed to me like they were pushing a narrative to try to get me to take the meds. And I finally was just
Hmm.
like, I don't want the meds.
Yeah.
And I ultimately didn't take them, but
Yeah.
it just was really weird to me.
Yeah. Well,
So,
the Kaiser psychiatrists don't do therapy and don't
yeah,
do coping mechanisms. They only do meds.
right.
Uh, if you're lucky enough to get to the point where they'll let you see a therapist, I use lucky loosely.
Mhm.
The program is so mechanized to get you in one door and out the other. It just feels impersonal and sterile.
Mhm.
Um, they literally, it's like a 12-week program with worksheets, and it's very much like taking a little course. And
Mhm.
when I finally got to my therapist I have today, I was like, oh, this is so good. And she's like, this is
Right.
what therapy is. I'm
Right.
like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So, now, with therapy, I mean, when you do your therapy, do they ever set goals with you? Do they say, "Hey, by X amount of date, we want you to be in this place," or is it just kind of? Because here's my concern. Sometimes I wonder and I question just some of the people I've run into. it'd be very easy if you're a therapist and you got the right person to have that person coming to you weekly for the rest of their lives.
Yes,
You know what I
yes, you
mean?
could. Yes.
Yeah, and
Um, and to complicate matters, because those therapists exist who have that in
yeah,
their I mean, that's a real thing.
mhm,
And but to complicate matters, there are also people who need to come in for the rest of their lives,
right,
right?
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so it really you gotta you have to be careful with who you find and decide what you're comfortable with. We with in my work, we make small goals here and there.
mhm,
None of them
mhm,
are like to to not need therapy anymore. That's not on our
right,
agenda yet. Maybe it will be one day.
mhm,
Uh, but for now, it's like how many days can I go without having an extreme panic attack, you know,
mhm, mhm,
and finding ways to prevent those with mindfulness exercises and breathing and gardening and things like that, you know.
mhm, mhm,
Um, so it's not something I worry about because I really enjoy therapy. It's for me, it's the highlight of my week.
interesting.
And if she's is actually a maniacal villain exploiting me, then I guess I've signed up for it.
So let me ask you, the panic attacks, do you have you found those linked to a certain thing? Like, is it you start worrying about work or you start worrying about finances or something like that? Or is it just they come out of nowhere?
um, yes.
Oh, okay. All of the above?
Yeah, yeah. It's it could be. I can definitely have panic or depression spurred from day to day events of life. But I also have times where it seems to just happen, just
Mm, mm,
literally just happen.
wow. Do you feel like that's always been the case?
Yes. And I wish I understood what it was, you know?
Earlier. Yeah,
Yeah. I didn't
yeah.
have the right language for what I was experiencing. And so I gave it other labels like stupid and
Mhm,
lazy and
mhm,
weak,
mhm.
you know?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the self-loathing talk kind of
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
So, now let me ask you, kinda going back to church, you've left the church, you feel better. Are there times so I've heard some people refer to it as like a deconstruction, right?
Hmm.
Where do you are there times that you regret not going to church or you think maybe I didn't make the right choice or anything of that nature?
Not I've never questioned whether I made the right choice. That
Mm,
is 100% certain.
mhm,
Uh, there are times when I miss certain things,
mm.
you know?
One I hear is the
Um,
camaraderie. I hear that a lot of people miss the camaraderie that comes along with it.
yeah, I mean, I don't have a community
Right.
anymore. Not at
Uh-huh.
all. I've got a
Mhm.
family, I got a handful of friends, and I mean, my friends are the people I work with mostly. Um, but I don't foresee having a network of hundreds of people that I go and share bread with at a Christmas party. I don't know if that'll ever be part of my life again.
Mm.
And that part is kind of sad.
Yeah.
But uh I'd still make the same choice knowing what I've lost or would lose.
So here's a question for you. And I'm really asking just to get in your mindset. Is there any reason why you couldn't just like, hey, the church is having a Christmas party, take my family, say hi to some friends, or go to like, they do like Easter things at the park, stuff like that. Is there any reason why you don't feel comfortable doing that?
I know people who do that ex-Mormons who do
Mhm.
that and are able to. Um, I'm not there yet. I'm still pissed off. I'm
Mm.
still angry. Um,
What are you angry
and
about?
I feel like uh, I lost a lot to Mormonism. You know, um, I felt like I lived a fake identity for most of my life. I feel like I've carried guilt and shame really unnecessarily
Mhm.
for things I didn't need to carry guilt and shame for. Hated my mission. Really wish I didn't go on that.
Mhm.
Um, and
Did you let me stop right there. Did you always feel that way? Did you always feel like you wish you hadn't gone?
uh, I don't know if I would have used those words. What I did feel was that I couldn't express to people how I really felt about my mission, which was basically 2 years of being scared and lonely and really depressed.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, in hindsight, I wish I hadn't gone. I
Yeah.
went
It's just that
because
that's
I was
something that I
supposed to.
find right. I find that to be something that even a lot of the ex-Mormons that I've run into, they that tends to not be their experience. They tend to say the mission was actually a lot of fun and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know a lot
Uh,
of people are really grateful for their mission experience.
yeah.
Um, I could tell you, I'd be curious to get more people that served in England surveyed,
Yeah.
but
Uh-huh.
it's kind of a miserable place to be a missionary.
Yeah.
Um,
I've heard that from a lot of kind of the European countries. I know someone who went to Sweden had a really hard mission because they're
yeah,
just the national religion is atheism.
right,
What are you gonna do? Yeah.
right. So yeah, very secular sort of people. I was in bad neighborhoods, you know, was mugged once, had kids would treat us bad and throw crap at us and stuff. And
Mhm.
at the time, you kind of wear it like a badge of honor because you're supposed to be persecuted because
Right.
we're
Right,
here
right.
doing God's thing. That just makes us more right.
Yeah. Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
but I saw one person baptized the whole time I was there,
Mhm.
and then going back to the like scrupulosity, having to feel perfect and look happy and be the best. You feel pretty crappy when you're not baptizing people on your mission.
Yeah, yeah, that has to be tough.
Yeah. But yeah, I was really unhappy and I was in pain. I hurt my knees really bad on my mission. I ended up coming home a
Mhm.
little early
Mm.
because of it. And so yeah, I just didn't like it.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And it rained
It's
every
interesting.
day.
Yeah. Well, so what do you think that you would need from, say, or maybe you don't need anything, but what would you say that members of the church who are listening to this, who still go, who still are faithful, could do to be a little more welcoming to, say, someone like you or other ex-Mormons like you?
Um, I don't know because I haven't necessarily been put off by members since leaving the church. I've mostly avoided them.
Right. Right.
But given the opportunity, the one thing I would say, like this comes just from my experience with like some of my family and especially my parents, is listen. Is just listen and let people talk. One of the things that I've found that I feel really is kind of an imbalance and unfair with my own parents. It's me and my wife Amber. We're the closest family to my parents geographically. We go visit them all the time. We take care of and help them with things. So it's an awkwardness between us that we've left, and they're still both very active.
Are the rest of
Um,
your siblings also active?
Technically, Jake's active. Jake's fully active, but he's pretty nuanced. He's kind of like you, I think, mostly in mindset.
Mhm.
I have a sister who's like I think honestly is maybe ready to bail. And then one
Mm,
sister who is definitely active. But in with my mom, uh she gets really uncomfortable if I express how I really feel about the church and certain things, you know?
mm,
She doesn't
mhm.
want to hear it, but she also wants to talk to us about what they did in Relief Society this week and
Right.
about the cool things she heard in General Conference. And so I just want it to be fair and even,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And if you
Right.
want to tell me how cool you think Joseph Smith was, you need to allow me to tell you how not cool I think Joseph Smith was. That's
Right.
all, you know? So that's what members could do is just
Mhm.
have a little thicker skin and be okay to hear because you're kind of trained to avoid this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Hide from it. Don't hear
Yeah.
it. Wow, wow,
What
wow, wow.
what well, what I find so interesting, and I've thought about this a lot, and this is my own opinion, and I think people like to argue with me, especially who I would call in the box like members, right? And when you say I'm nuanced, I think I'm nuanced in that I don't necessarily think that all of the things that are culturally placed, I don't think that those are necessarily accurate. I'm kind of the opinion where I go, if you can answer all of the temple recommend questions accurately and get a temple recommend, then none of the other stuff matters. Like, it doesn't matter if
And
you
that
have tattoos or earrings
and
or
that
anything
makes
like
you
that.
nuanced. That
Right,
definitely makes you nuanced. Yes.
which I think is silly, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, right, like if you think about these things, we have personal revelation, right? That's the whole concept of they've been talking about it a lot for the last few years. So all of these other things, if they're policies, they're recommendations for you to pray about and ask God if you need to follow them or not. Well, if you go through that process and you determine, yeah, I don't think God necessarily thinks bad of me if I get a tattoo. And you can walk into God's temple, which says you're recommended to God, which essentially means you can get into the celestial kingdom, right? I mean, that's what you're doing in the temple is you're doing all the things that you're supposed to do to get past the veil, right? Then it really doesn't matter if you have a tattoo or not. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, so all that stuff, sure, they're recommendations and they're nice and maybe for some people, but not for everybody.
Mhm.
But the problem is again, like I think the issue that I have, I think, with these members when we have these conversations is that like it almost feels to me like an insecurity in their own testimony.
Mhm.
Like you're sitting there and you're telling me, like, listen, if you were a Republican, you're telling me you couldn't sit there and listen to a Democrat tell you all the reasons why they're a Democrat and still remain a Republican?
Right.
99% of them can do that,
Yeah.
right? Nobody's switching sides to the Democratic Party because they hear a Democrat talking about all the reasons why they're Democrat.
Right.
But at the same time, like, why is it then that you can hear all of these things? What is it about? Like, I can sit there and everything that you've said here, I can validate and say, I understand for you that that's why you've left. I've chosen to stay and been
Yeah.
totally comfortable with everything that you've said. For some reason, other members can't do that. They have to do something like say, well, Kenny must have been doing all these bad things that we don't know about. He must have been, he didn't have a strong enough testimony. He wasn't following right. He must have not been reading his scriptures. By the way, news alert, none of you are, right? I mean, like, like I
Yeah.
question how many of you are really following the come follow me. You know what I mean? Like, so, that's another thing just on a random rant while I'm on it is it really bothers me that when people hear that people leave, they say, well, they weren't reading their scriptures enough, like they should be doing more work than what you're doing
Right.
to circumvent their faith crisis. You know what I mean?
And
Like you
most
expect them to do
honestly,
more.
most people who leave the church, at least the ones who I've known, have done so much to try to
Yeah,
prevent it from happening before it
yeah,
happens.
right.
And the decision to leave ultimately is like a last straw type of thing. It's like I've tried everything you've offered me here and it's not fitting. I'm
Yeah,
done. I'm
yeah.
exhausted, you know.
Right, right. So, Well, I got to tell you, like this conversation, I think there needs to be more of these.
Yeah.
I think that these types of conversations where you, as someone who's left the church, and me, who's someone who's stayed, can talk about the reasons why they stay. I do believe it. I do believe that it's true. Do I believe that somebody who's Christian, or somebody who is Muslim, who's lived a very good life and loves God, is not going to get to heaven just because, like, they weren't Mormon? I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't necessarily think that we even know 5% of what God is, right?
And that's pretty freaking nuanced. Just saying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, and the thing is, if you read, but here's the thing that's so funny about that is, I don't think it should be,
Yeah.
because if you listen to some of these talks, they're telling you, like, if you read them really deeply, like Dallin H. Oaks has said, we don't really know that much. You know what I mean? Here's what we do know, and this is what we follow, and we're going to stick to it. But we don't really know. God is still revealing things to us. Could he reveal stuff to us about the LGBTQ community that we haven't heard yet? I think that that's possible, and quite frankly, probable at some point.
I
You know?
assume so. I assume so.
Yeah.
I think the church is already testing the waters, actually.
I've heard of some things. I know that Charlie Bird and his husband are active in their ward.
And have a calling and take the sacrament,
Right,
which
right,
is that's a huge deal, you know.
right, right.
So who knows? Maybe
It's going to be an interesting thing, and I think what's going to be fascinating, if in our lifetime, is going to be hearing 20 years down the road, if it does happen, 20 years down the road, what the explanations were.
I
And
will be sitting here with a bucket of popcorn and watching.
it'll be interesting. So tell me, Kenny, you got a bunch of projects going on.
Yeah.
Tell people where they can, and I have to say this, we didn't talk a ton. We did talk a little bit about it in the first part, but we didn't talk about it really here. But your work is really, really good.
Thank
Like,
you.
I mean that, like, watching your stuff. I haven't rented or bought your documentary yet on healthcare, but I'm going to. Where can people find your work, and then where can they follow you?
Yeah. So Archivist Entertainment is my production company. And at archivistentertainment.com, you can see all of my documentary work, as well as links to where it can be accessed. The latest film, Healing Us, is on Amazon for rent and purchase right now. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, a little bit on Facebook. Hate Twitter, so don't even bother adding me there. I'm not going to call it X. That only made me hate it worse. Oh, I hate Twitter so much.
Did you hate it before Elon Musk?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've
Yeah.
always found it the most obnoxious of all the platforms out there.
I just, a lot of people have told me that I should be putting these podcasts on Twitter, and I have a few times. I just don't like it.
I don't like it either. I feel like I can't say anything without starting a fight in that space, and
Yeah.
I'm like, some people want like that. It's not what I'm into.
Right.
On TikTok, I post mostly random creative stuff. I sing songs in my car, and earlier I posted Ex-Mormon content stuff there for a while, but I'm not doing that so much anymore. And then Instagram is my photography. I have a website called kenny.fun, which is where I put photography and poetry and video experiments and just weird, just creative stuff. Yeah.
Nice. So there are lots of places to follow you. And then your podcast, The Talkies, is that just on YouTube?
The Talkies is on YouTube. It is on all the podcast places. So you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcast, We just switched back to it being a video podcast in addition to audio. For a while, we were just doing audio. So we got cameras up and going again now. And so YouTube's more fun, I think.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I put these on YouTube, and I think I focus more on the YouTube just because the subscriber base, it seems more easy to access and understand your analytics than
Yeah.
say
Yeah, no,
it's
that's
hard to
true.
track all the other things in one.
YouTube's great
you
for
know?
that. And our podcast is it's unique. We're 4 filmmakers that are talking about a movie we just saw. It's a completely spoiler-filled podcast, so you want to watch the movie first before you watch our episodes. And then we kind of analyze, discussed, or trash the movie from our perspectives as filmmakers. And then at the end, we give the most nuanced rating in the industry. We didn't like stars or tomato meter ratings out there because there's not enough nuance in it.
Okay.
Boils the movie down to a number. So we give it a pizza rating. We compare the movie to a metaphorical pizza.
Nice.
We each take turns describing an imaginary pizza that embodies the essence of the movie, and
Wow.
it's my favorite part of the episode.
So if you put pineapple on the pizza, does that make it a bad movie or a good
Oh,
movie?
see, that's a hotly debated item. Yes, but like we've had pizzas that had like motor oil and rusted nails as toppings, like really bad movies. So it's fun.
Nice. Well, right on. Well, Kenny, I appreciate this. We'll have to do it again, especially as you move on and do other documentaries and stuff. We'll have you on and talk about it again.
Sure.
Appreciate your time. I appreciated the conversation. I hope if you've listened to this and listened to both parts, you've been able to understand kind of where somebody who is no longer going, where their mindset goes, and I'd say the thing about you and your brother Jake, you guys have been, to me, uh, some of my favorite people to deal with in and out of the church, just because you guys, I just dig eclectic people, and you're just like I feel
the
that way
the
often. I feel
Ballentines are eclectic.
yeah, I
Yes.
like it. So anyhow, yeah, so subscribe. We got more fun stuff coming up. Got a lot of fun stuff in the works as always, and we'll talk to you later. So.
Thanks.